right, Esther chapter 9, let's call this one A Recipe for Relief and subtitle it A Cup of Schemes, understanding that the way in which Haman had his schemes turned back on him is going to be expanded in this chapter to see the ways in which those who were going to help Haman eliminate or commit genocide against the Jewish people had that scheme turned back on them as well, where the first half of the chapter shows the way in which Esther and Mordecai go about providing the Jewish people relief from those who would have killed them on the 13th day of the 12th month of the year. And the second half of the chapter is going to describe the way in which they celebrate their opportunity to rest and have relief from the attempts on their lives. First of all, the first half of the chapter sets it off by saying near the second half of the first verse, with regard to that 13th day of the 12th month, on the very day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain the mastery over them, the reverse occurred. The Jews gained mastery over those who hated them, thus turning their schemes back on them. Drawing on that metaphor or symbolism we took from the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus said, with the measure we use, it will be measured back to us, just like we saw Haman initially measure a great portion of honor for himself, only to have to give that honor to Mordecai, then have the pain that he planned out for Mordecai measured back to him on the gallows he had built to hang Mordecai. Likewise, now, just as Mordecai has received the measure of honor that Haman once had with the king's signet ring, this chapter is going to show the way in which the pain and suffering planned or measured out for the Jewish people is now going to be measured back onto those who planned to kill them. First, describing the way in which the fear of the people of Israel settles into all around them, so that anyone who thought they might have withstood the Jewish people are going to be too afraid to even try. Likewise, the fear of Mordecai has taken over the officials in Persia, so they are going to help make sure that the king's edict is carried out, as the edict is going to be carried out on a single day throughout the provinces, but in Susa, the citadel of their stronghold, where they fasted on Esther's behalf. It's going to take 2 days, understanding that on the first day, the 13th, they're going to kill roughly 500 men who had gotten caught up in the conspiracy against the Jewish people. And then the king is going to do what sounds like a progress check and be like, Esther, how's it going? She's going to be like, can we have another day? Don't mean to trivialize it, but she's going to ask for another day, and the king is going to grant them an additional day, the 14th, to finish what needed to be done in Susa. On that day, they're going to kill another 300 men. But throughout the kingdom, 75,000 people are going to be killed on the day they plan to do harm to the Jewish people. And the second half of the chapter is going to describe the way in which they finally had relief from their enemies. Thus the title this week, A Recipe for Relief. That whole concept of a recipe also relating to the fact that they are going to have the Feast of Purim to celebrate the fact that they can finally rest from their enemies. It's going to be a day of feasting, also a day of rejoicing, and also looking out for the poor, something that recurs throughout the law and God's request to his people. Look out for those who cannot look out for themselves. If you needed any reason why, you don't have to look any further than the dilemma from which you were just delivered. And so now, after describing the way that they are able to rest and celebrate after being given relief from those who would have killed them, it's going to talk about the way in which this is going to be made a perpetual feast or time of celebration in Israel, commemorating 2 days. One, the 14th day of the 12th month, that being the day after those throughout the provinces were given relief from those who would have harmed them, but understanding it took 2 days to get that relief in Susa. They also celebrate the 15th, the day after they got relief in Susa as well. Thus, Purim, as it's celebrated here in the book of Esther, takes place on the 14th and 15th days of the 12th month. The end of the chapter describing the way in which Esther and Mordecai intended for the people to be obligated to feast and rejoice in the way they were once obligated to mourn and fast. And it reminded me once again, as we kind of mentioned in the last chapter, there are times where life will bring you to periods, if not of fasting, but mourning. So my wish for you is rooted in the reason why we once got in the habit of saying God's best to you as you go forward in him, because as you go forward in God, my wish for you is that in much the same way life might have once obligated you to mourn because of your circumstances, I pray that God bring you into places where you feel nothing less than obligated to celebrate the way that he has brought you through and given you rest.